thank you everybody for joining today's session. I appreciate people taking time out of busy schedules and probably fitting this in their lunch break, or taking this in lieu of a lunch break, which probably brings me on to some issues that we'll face later on in the conversation. I think everybody has been hit by COVID-19, if not physically with suffering with health, then certainly with respect to how we have had to pivot to home working. So like most organisations, CRISP as a business had to pivot to home working back in March of this year, and we've had 200 days. Today is our 200th day of home working, which I'm sure is the same for most of the office-based organisations in the world, not just in the Leeds environment. And CRISP as a business, we've hired 50 new joiners into our organisation since we went into lockdown, which means that we've hired, we've onboarded, and we've now got 50 productive members of the team. However, they've never met any of their colleagues, they've probably never met their manager, and they've certainly never seen our fantastic office space. And so as a result, we've obviously been thinking long and hard about what we do with our future strategy, and we've looked to the marketplace, and we've obviously all seen the headlines from some major tech businesses out there, especially the sort of the San Francisco Bay businesses, people like Google and Salesforce, etc., and their statements that they've made about the future of their workplace. But we wanted to be really thoughtful about, what we did as an organisation, and we're still considering our future strategy about returning to the workplace and when that will be. And we wanted to take the conversation really today beyond the sort of hygiene factors and the health and safety considerations we should have as a responsible employer for when we do come to return people to the office. And we just really wanted to sort of kick off a survey and sort of get some thought leadership around what other businesses are doing and how they've responded to COVID-19 and their workplace. So as I've mentioned, we produced a survey which we sent out to a number of different organisations, and we had a really good response of almost 60 companies took part across various sectors. Predominantly in technology, and from 12 countries. So today we're going to have a recap of the results, which hopefully you would have received in advance of this session. We sent an executive summary out, just very high level, showing you the response rate and the key themes that we drew from that. And then today we're going to talk about, with our really fantastic panel, which I'm delighted to introduce you to shortly, we're going to talk about the individual impacts as well as company, and obviously the economical perspective, and how that impacts on our local economies and the global economy. So I'm going to move on and introduce you to our fantastic panel. So we have with us Eve Roodhouse, and Eve is the Chief Officer for Economic Development within Leeds City Council. I've had the pleasure of engaging with Eve on a number of initiatives that Leeds City Council is working with at the moment, and has been doing so for some time. And so Eve really is able today to give us a perspective on the economical impact on the Leeds City Council and economic region, on what the council's response has been, and obviously on what the sort of future might look like, as much as we can all sort of try to foresee what that looks like. We've also, and one thing to sort of add is that each of the panelists has also given their insight into the things that they've loved and also they've struggled with in lockdown, because we all have a human perspective. So Eve has kindly shared that the thing she's loved is obviously more time with the family, being able to spend more time at meal times with the children and have meaningful conversations. But that is obviously countered with the fact that as a parent, the homeschooling was probably challenging for every parent on this call. And also that, the arguments about noise levels when you're on important conference calls, and the fights over the Xbox controllers is probably something that a lot of parents are also can sympathise with. We have Matthew Davis. Matthew is an associate professor at Leeds University, specialising in organisational psychology. And Matthew has shared with me that he's been, again, loving the family time and learning to bake, but that's also countered with, like everybody, there's sort of the uncertainty that surrounds COVID and what that means for us as individuals and for our organisations and our families. We've got Tom Bridges, who's the director of at Arup and is the Leeds office leader. And Tom works with organisations advising on the built environment from an office perspective, naturally. And Tom has shared that the things he's loving is going for a walk before he starts that's his commute now, instead of jumping in a car or getting on public transport. So his morning routine has definitely changed. But the things that Tom is missing is obviously the interactions and the face time with people and being around people in the office, which I think Eve shared as well, and I'm sure that we all do. And then we've got Rob Smedley, who is a principal associate at Evershed Sutherland, working in the employment law team. And looking at Rob's LinkedIn profile, he's been there for 14 years. And again, I think the sentiments from Rob echoed by us all, that enjoying the time with family, but also Rob is missing the sort of work-life balance and being able to find that switch to turn off from work, which I think, again, is a theme that we've heard a lot from our employees, and we also feel ourselves. So just very quickly, a few slides here that we've sort of all seen from right at the outset of COVID-19, and how organisations pivoted to people working from home. And we've only got a few slides to just walk through some of the high level results. But I think we can see here that most organisations have gone from being in the office space with predominantly 5 days a week, a little bit of flexible working, to people moving predominantly to being home working, or everybody home working, although some organisations have now started to return to the office. One headline to sort of draw out there, which is probably a couple of years old now, but I added it because of the relevance that we've seen previously, is IBM back in 2017. They actually reversed out of having remote workers and brought people back into the office, which caused a huge amount of, I think the Yorkshire word would be kerfuffle at the time, because everybody was used to working and having no commute and working from home. So there was a huge amount of attrition at the time they brought workers back into the office. Yahoo went through something similar with reversing out of home working under a new CEO, which was not very popular, understandably. And then obviously other headlines there about home working, isolation, anxiety and burnout are things that as businesses we need to think about as we are in this home working scenario right now. So just moving on, the demographics of the respondents from the survey, as you can see, we had 59 respondents, and 30% of those represented C-suite and the decision makers in the business. And almost 50% were within human resources functions and roles. So they were very sort of people orientated. And I think their responses definitely demonstrated the fact that, they were really focused on sort of human resource functions, whether that was talent management and acquisition, whether that was knowledge management, or whether it was sort of generalist HR leaders. We had a number of geographies. UK was by far the largest representation, and we had 9 other respondents who were in the US. All of the US respondents were in the technology space, and 32% were technology, with professional services and consultancy representing almost 14% of our responses. We've obviously seen that companies have responded with practical support, and I think that this slide here speaks loudly and clearly that IT equipment was by far the biggest investment that companies had to make. Organisations where maybe people had desktop PCs and suddenly they had to organise for people to have laptops. So that represented a huge additional investment for companies. But it's good to see that well-being actually is shortly behind that, with 34% of businesses obviously investing and responding with increased support for well-being, which I'm sure Matt will be able to talk about a little bit later. The other support that I think, again, is really key, and this came out loud and clear within our survey results, was the social interactions. And I think, Tom, in his sort of brief profile, had spoken about missing the social interactions, and Eve as well. And so these are some of the ways that organisations have sought to address that. So by putting in place team calls has been by far and away the largest volume of social interactions that have been implemented, so an increase in that, with quizzes. I'm sure that if you were to hold an investment in a quiz platform right now, you'd be celebrating a return on investment at some point. Video calls, a lot of organisations responded to say that their investment in technology had been to implement Microsoft Teams or Zoom or some other video call technology so they could facilitate these team calls and manager check-ins. And then other organisations have looked to do things like escape rooms, team drinks, treasure hunts, which I thought was quite interesting. And some organisations have actually returned some people back to the office, which we will sort of cover as part of our topic later. And then mental health support, again, the biggest investment there in reinforcing or introducing employee assistance programs, just to give some employees somebody that they could speak to give them an outlet. Group sessions, another great way to make sure that your team's staying connected. Giving mental health and first aid training to managers is something which has been most definitely valued by all of the participants, and is definitely helping them in respect of their engagement and supporting mental health within their teams. And again, the social events and maintaining the social interactions with people, with a few organisations leveraging from qualified psychologists either in-house for the larger organisations or to utilise an external expert. One of the things that every organisation needs to sort of factor in is the consultation about the return back to the workplace. And a Steel Case survey, which was taken back in 2019 about engagement in the workplace, really sort of pulled out the key findings about sort of the employee engagement, which positively correlates with workplace satisfaction. And ensuring that employees have an appropriate workplace, whether that's their home workplace, which has been kitted out appropriately for them to be able to work effectively at home in a way that is supportive of their physical and mental health, or if they are to return to the office in this current climate, then to make sure that they have overcome any safety fears, that they are cognizant of the measures put in place by their employer to make sure that they are able to be returned to the workplace safely. Engaged employees feel like they have more control over their experiences at work, and it's very difficult to engage employees when there isn't that sort of face-to-face interaction, or there is not regular communication that's missing between manager and the individual. So maintaining communication with direct reports is critical. And change is a difficult process for employees at any time, but sort of adding the dimension of people not having that face-to-face interaction obviously then means that it's very difficult for them to process change. And I think it's very difficult for employers to be able to achieve change, but I will defer to our expert, Matt, on that shortly. So here on this slide, we're just calling out really quickly the sort of risks versus benefits of working from home. So attrition is obviously a key risk because not everybody wants to be home working. We've surveyed our employees internally, and a number of employees are really struggling, whether that's due to sort of childcare. Working with young children around is obviously quite a struggle for them. We also have parents who've had to do the homeschooling, which obviously that situation is different now that children have been able to return to school. But attrition is obviously a factor for every organisation as we look at our future strategy. And then the benefits, a wider talent pool. I think sometimes it can be a struggle to identify and to be able to hire talent, especially for niche skills or with hot jobs where it's a very competitive market. And the ability to be able to attract talent who can work remotely is something which I think a lot of businesses will be able to benefit from. But then obviously we will sort of defer to Eve to talk about what that then means for the impact on the local economy. So flexible working, I think our survey demonstrated that most organisations were looking at flexible working, and these were sort of the main considerations for companies. So obviously, when working in a flexible working environment, the office needs to be fit for purpose. And again, we have Tom who can give some input and thought into office infrastructures. But things like hot desking, so for example, do you have technology in place, or could you access technology quickly to be able to do capacity planning and ensure that you have capacity to accommodate everybody coming into the office at the same time? Would you need to have anchored desks, for example, for roles where there is confidentiality, so for HR, for legal, for your finance teams? Flexible working hours throws up a whole different consideration. So core hours, would you be able to work without restrictions? So could people work 24/7, or would you want to restrict people to working between 7 and 7, for example? Which then, if you were outside of those hours, there may be potential lone working considerations. You would also need to think about things like fire marshals and first aiders to make sure you are health and safety compliant. You'd also need to conduct DSE assessments and make reasonable adjustments. For example, if somebody required an orthopaedic chair, there are lots of considerations around flexible working for organisations to consider to make sure that you're discharging your obligations. And then legal, so geographical considerations. If you were to allow people to work anywhere, then you may find yourselves in a situation where you've inadvertently set up a permanent establishment in a country. You'd need to have a legal entity. That in itself brings up tax implications that you would need to be very thoughtful about for the company as well as for the individual. Changes to contracts, and again, we have our employment law expert ready to jump in. So you'd need to think about, are you going to change contracts, or are you going to rely on custom and practice? Is this something that you would do by consultation? The whole process you would need to consider around the sort of legal changes. And then obviously policies for home working. Who's responsible for travel expenses into the office if people are home working, if you change their contract base to being based at home rather than working in an office. And then I think on the personal perspective, the considerations are definitely around collaboration. So making sure that people are able to build the networks outside of their team. And that's something that we're really seeing with our onboarding process. We're trying to expose people across and outside of their silo so that they have a better understanding of the entire organisation rather than just what their team does. And making sure that you leverage and implement technology that assists with this. So whiteboarding tools, making sure that you have correct collaboration, people know where they should save their documentation, etc. People development is a key one, really, looking at knowledge transfer and consistency of knowledge and how people document that knowledge and how they share that. I think it's been called out by a number of people that early careers is going to be challenging. How you learn is very much on the job, side by side, shoulder to shoulder with a more senior individual, and that can be harder when you're working remotely. And then obviously there's a different skill set for managers to be able to manage a remote team, and our organisations ready and prepared for being able to deliver training for managers to be able to manage remote teams. And the age-old one about performance and managing performance, which can be tricky in person, but when you're working remotely is obviously a factor. And then everybody is missing the water cooler moments. We're all missing those ad hoc meetings. I know one of the struggles I have is my eyesight is definitely worse from staring at a screen for 10 hours a day. And the informal meetings I would have had just don't happen. Everything has to be planned and everything is on screen. And I think that that's something that everybody is missing. New joiners into the business don't get the full exposure to different functions, and we really need to prevent silos and make sure that relationships can be formed outside of teams, which allow people that full understanding of the organisation. And then finally, really the high employment engagement, which is obviously linked to employee satisfaction, are all of the considerations that organisations, in my opinion, and from the results of the survey, should be considering. So, having heard enough from me, let's open the floor and let's ask some questions of our panel. So first and foremost, let's start with our own experiences. So has anybody returned to the office so far, and what's that felt like?
Yeah, me too. Who do you want to go first, Kirsten?
I want to go first, Eve.
Yeah, I've been back to our office in Leeds, and mixed feelings about it, really. So first of all, what I'd say is initially I went back before non-essential shops opened, because I had a new joiner who was a direct report, and I felt really strongly that I should meet them on their first day. I found that a bit depressing, if I'm honest, going into Leeds city centre, and it was so quiet at the time. But I found a kind of workspace that was radically changed. You know, parts of the building that were usually so vibrant and full of people were quiet. However, I've been back since then and used public transport as well, so travelled on the train. I found the public transport experience actually really safe. I felt really safe on the train. Train felt a lot cleaner than normal, and the whole layout of Leeds station was really well done in terms of direction of travel and so on, so I found that to be really safe. And there were more people in the office when I went in, so there were other colleagues to say hello to, obviously at a safe distance, and we were able at that point to arrange to also have meetings in rooms, again socially distanced, but you know, be able to actually just see colleagues. And it's amazing what a lift that gave me, just going into the office, seeing some colleagues, you know, just to get some of that energy back. And I felt very confident because of the arrangements that our team had put in place in the council. So At every desk there's tools to be able to wipe down the desk before you sit down, and then again after you leave, and clear markings about kind of maintaining distance. And so I did feel that it was worth going in when coordinating with other colleagues just to get that time together face to face.
Great. And Matt, I know you and I spoke before, and I don't think you've yet returned to the workplace, have you?
So I went in earlier in the summer, so campus was shut for everything other than students who were still living in their halls, who hadn't been able to return home, or some of the laboratories which were running. So it was a really weird experience. So we had to book a slot with Eventbrite and be escorted in by security because all the fire systems and others were switched off to retrieve things. So that's been my only taste of the office in the last 6 months, has been escorted by security and basically a ghost ship of a building. So I'm back on campus next week in the classroom for the first time in 6 months. I'm really looking forward to actually having a bit of interaction and seeing people face to face rather than through a screen for a change. It feels like it's been a long time coming.
Yeah, that's definitely. And Tom, what about yourself?
Yeah, I've been back in the office, and I'm currently doing a couple of days a week in the office, although not today. And we've decided, despite the PM's announcement last week and the restrictions in Leeds, to keep our office open for people who need to be there for a business reason or a well-being reason. And actually, I think it's really interesting. Some people have enjoyed working at home, and I'm not one of those people, and I found my own well-being has suffered from being cooped up. And for me, going in a couple of days a week is partly about doing my job, but it's partly also for my own well-being. Like Eve, it's all been brilliantly organised, and so when you're talking about fire marshals and first aiders and DSE assessments and screens and chairs and core hours, that all resonated with me. We're all physically distanced within an inch of our lives, with hand sanitizer at every opportunity. It's been interesting. We've opened up just one floor of our office. It has 4 floors. And that's been interesting because you actually get to you actually end up working with people you wouldn't normally be sat near. So that's been an interesting observation. There have been other sort of funny things like how behaviors changed, and so now if people want to do a video call, they just do it from their laptops. The days of going into a room and setting up the video conferencing equipment have moved on, but you're in the office and you've got your screen, but you haven't got a camera there, and so do you use your laptop? And I ended up piling my laptop on a sort of on top of boxes to get it at the right angle. So there's interesting sort of little adaptations. I think it's also I've also found I've been meeting up with people outside work, sort of going for walks, because particularly when you want to have one of those sort of difficult or important conversations, and I think most organizations, as well as dealing with working from home, are going through other challenges. We've been through a reshaping process over the summer, and our business has been impacted by COVID as well. And some of the conversations you need to have, those sort of 6-month check-in conversations, are so much better face to face. So one of my direct reports was living in a shared house in Leeds, and she's moved back home to Cumbria. And we ended up meeting up at Ingleton Waterfalls Trail last week to do her 6-month appraisal. And it was interesting that we both decided that was a worthwhile investment of our time to drive for an hour or more to do a meeting, so we could do it face to face. So yeah, really, really interesting experiences. And I've enjoyed being back in the office. It's not the same as it was before, but but we're thinking hard about what it might mean for the future.
Yeah, no, definitely. And Rob, welcome back. Apologies if we lost you through a technical issue. Yourself, have you returned to the office, and how have you found that?
I returned yesterday for my first day back in the Eversheds Leeds office. I found it, pretty surreal experience really. There was just a handful of colleagues in the office. And I think that kind of, yeah, it was great to kind of see people. So there's a kind of initial excitement about actually seeing real people in the flesh, but then there is this kind of alongside it, the kind of emptiness of the space around us all, and trying to work out how on earth it's going to kind of work going forward. So yeah, still pretty raw experience really. I have to kind of, I think, go back and experience it again really before I get my thoughts and feelings together. But it was good. It was just good to get back in, I think, overall.
Excellent. And Eve, you mentioned about sort of non-essential shops at the time that you first went back into the office. Obviously, there's been an impact on the sort of Leeds economy. What can you share with us about the impact that's been seen and how the council have been able to respond?
Yeah, so without taking up too much time, but just trying to give a bit of an overview as well. So you won't be surprised that obviously sectors of the economy that are dependent on face-to-face interactions are the hardest hit. So retail, hospitality, leisure, tourism, aviation, some of the kind of hardest hit parts of the economy. That's also where some of the kind of jobs were that were the most insecure jobs. And so we saw an initial increase in universal credit claimants across the city back in April, and we're now at a position where we've got unemployment levels that were similar to 2007 and 8, and that's before we see the end of the furlough scheme. We were in a situation in Leeds where we were really dealing with unemployment in particular wards, even down to knowing particular streets. We're now in a situation where there's unemployment across the whole of Leeds, and Gipton and Hare Hills, where there were sort of less than 4,000 people on universal credit before. I've now got 20,000 people on universal credit claimants, and that type of numbers becomes quite scary when you're sitting in local government thinking about how we're going to support those communities and those people. So what we've I'll come to the city centre in a moment, but what we've been doing obviously is administering the business grants that we were given to administer to retail, hospitality and leisure in the discretionary grant fund. And we've been really successful in getting around £160 million out the door to businesses across Leeds, which has really made a difference for them. But also pivoting some of our existing business support. Interestingly, all these points you're making about office and home working are as relevant to SMEs, and let's not forget they're the largest part of our economy. And we've seen a real surge from SMEs in their demand for one of our business support programs called Digital Enterprise, which provides access to kind of grant vouchers and advice about investing in digital. So there's been a real surge in that. On the unemployment side, we've kind of reorganised to make sure we've got a single kind of portal for people to find advice. We're working really closely with partners like DWP and colleges to make sure that kind of there's a really coherent offer to people that find themselves in that situation, and so that we don't double do, because there is a lot of kind of efforts going in. Just on the city centre side, so I think, we were almost celebrating initially in March about how much the footfall had dropped in the city centre, because we were in a crisis moment and actually we wanted everybody to stay at home. Then I think over time, obviously, the recovery of that footfall as restrictions have eased has been very gradual. So you haven't seen a sudden kind of bounce back. You've seen this really kind of gradual increase as more things have reopened, and you've got more confidence in people returning into space. But there's also a kind of a double whammy for a city like Leeds and the other core cities, is that we have such a concentration of offices that our footfall in the city has recovered less quickly than smaller towns, smaller cities and towns. And that has a knock-on impact for all those businesses that are in the city centre. So, just think of your favourite coffee shops like Lanes, Dough Hut, all these fabulous kind of independents in Leeds that depend a lot on footfall of people like ourselves when we're in the city. And they're in a really, really difficult set of circumstances. And you'll have seen today that from a local government perspective, like Andy Burnham and others raising this question of, a kind of bit of a north-south divide emerging in terms of some of the restrictions that are being placed in northern towns, really having a detrimental impact on some of those businesses, because there's a kind of difference in the position. And so I think there's a way to go in understanding how some of that plays out over time in terms of the economy. I'll leave it there for now because I'm sure that others will have a view on some of those things that I raised.
No, great points. And Tom, your perspective on this?
Yeah, I think it's so I think the issues Eve flags are really serious issues, and the long-term scarring effect of people, particularly young people, of a period of mass unemployment could be, as well as the hardship in the short term, it will impact many of those people's life chances and earnings and the productive capacity of the economy over the longer term. I also think the evidence shows that women have been particularly hard hit because the sectors that Eve talked about tend to have a higher proportion of women, and then women have also generally bear the brunt of childcare responsibilities. And so I think the significant progress that has been made at a national level about increase in participation of women in the workforce, there's a risk that could be now reversed, and that would be not good news for anyone. I think there are also implications for more knowledge-based companies. You know, a large part of the success of Leeds City Centre in recent years has been in something called KIBS, Knowledge Intensive Business Services. And people have predicted the death of cities, the death of distance because of technology in the past. And actually the opposite's happened. As the economy has become more specialist, as it's become more focused on intangibles like data, like creativity, ideas, face-to-face communication has become more, not less important. People, Bruce Katz, the American economist from the Brookings Institute, has said people no longer want to drive to their out-of-town office and keep their ideas secret within their buildings. They want to share their ideas in the hyper-caffeinated spaces between the buildings. And Eve mentioned lanes, and I think if you could put an economic multiplier on Lane's coffee shop in terms of knowledge spillovers and transfer of ideas and relationships built, it would be a really, really big one. And so, smart people want to work alongside other smart people. The economy has changed, and so it's also about the diversity of different sectors. So we're doing an event for Leeds Digital Festival tomorrow, and it's an immersive tour of Temple Works, and that's where we use drones to survey the Grade 1 listed Temple Works in Holbeck for our client CEG. We then used a gaming engine to build an immersive model of the building. And it's a classic convergence of technologies, robotics, immersive tech, software and gaming engines and engineering, all coming together to solve a problem. And that's kind of what the modern economy is like. And that depends on those spillovers and face-to-face interactions. And the work that the council and the university have championed around the MIT REAP initiative, it's all about the ecosystem. It's all about how universities, corporates, entrepreneurs, investors and the public sector work together. And that happens in places. So I think whilst the impact at the moment is very acute and very visible on retail and hospitality and tourism, actually there's also an impact on companies and sectors such as ours, and it's around productivity. Productivity is not about getting through your to-do list. People, I think, define productivity quite narrowly. Productivity is about how an organization can create the new products and processes and improvements to be more efficient and generate more value. And so I think there's, so whilst I'm sort of a bit downhearted, I also think for all those reasons, offices and cities and city centres will be back, because the advantages of those face-to-face interactions are so great. And I think the firms that retain the right type, right configuration of office space in the right places will outcompete the firms that go 100% to working from home. And I think that will be good news for cities, but they will need to adapt and change.
Yeah, great point. And Matt, talking about sort of change and pivoting, obviously with your sort of psychology lens, what do you think businesses need to sort of be more aware of nowadays in this sort of current climate as they're looking to at transformation and change programs, which can be hard when you're face to face, but how do you think businesses need to respond to be able to be agile?
That's a really good question. I think I found it great listening to Tom there. I think nodding away in agreement around, I think, still the importance of space and place for so many reasons. So I think this idea of change, I think you're right. So change at any point is difficult and it's threatening for people. And it places a burden on us, I think, in terms of adaptation, in terms of dealing with, not only the change in terms of maybe work processes and ways of doing things, but also the social side that goes with that. So often if you change, process, you're changing somebody's job, that might change who they work and interact with them, and all sorts of knock-on effects from that. But I think particularly at the moment with COVID, I think the additional stress that we have from, I think, that background anxiety around what's happening in society. So whether it's in terms of the health kind of concerns or concerns over friends, partners, others in terms of employment or other kind of outcomes as well, I think adds another layer to this. And we know particularly when you look at work I've been involved in, other colleagues as well, looking at particularly tech change, so bringing in new IT systems or software and so on, that there's this whole phenomenon of techno stress, we call it, in terms of just the stress that's induced either from a change in an existing technology that you know really well, and then a feature changes. And I think if you're using Microsoft Teams, that might happen on a daily basis at the moment, buttons move and all the rest of it. But also the uncertainty that brings. And I think we're in a particularly difficult time at the moment with, I think, the pace of change that we're asking people to deal with here's a new technology, a new way of trying to interact and pushing these at people and forcing a change in how they work. And then the other changes we might be looking at around employment practices and everything else that goes with it. So I think you mentioned this at the start, Kirsten, around engagement of employees. And we know when you look across companies going back the last 10, 20 years, who try to move towards maybe more agile workspaces or activity-based workspaces to help accommodate people who are working from home or from client offices a lot, where you might hot desk and have different like coffee spaces and so on. But those tend to be overwhelmingly most successful when the staff themselves had a real say in how that's going to be designed. So the types of space they need, the technology requirements, the types of meeting spaces versus others. And also the other softer bits in terms of, well, how do we decide who's coming in and not? Because I think a lot of the discussion we've had over the last few months in the press and so on around the death of the office has been kind of, we're all working from home or we're not. And if we're not, we have much smaller offices and people won't be in very often. Well, that then forces, I think, managers to take decisions over, well, who can come in and when. So everybody can't come in at the same time. So there's going to have to be something that helps shape when people come in. So suddenly we're going to be making decisions around who can interact, who can sit together, who's able to commute in on what days. And that has quite profound implications for people. I think getting back to knowledge sharing, information sharing, do you bring a team in or do you deliberately try and shake things up so it's not team-based? What happens to the other people who are not in the office? How do they join meetings without getting cut out? All sorts of things that stem from that. And I think at the moment, I think we're looking at how do we get some people back into the office as opposed to what do we do in hopefully a few months' time when we're in that next phase when we can make these kind of longer standing decisions.
Yeah, great. I think what would be good is maybe to do a short poll of the participants just to see how many people have actually returned to the office. So Victoria, who's just started a poll just, to find out whether people have returned to the office. And hopefully by the end of this, we'll have a bit of an idea and a sense from participants as well as the people who are on the panel. So Matt, just whilst we've got you there, I think that, we part of the survey that we did, we saw the results around the social interactions and obviously mental health and well-being. We had the joy of summer. We had, a pretty good summer as it goes in the UK. However, as we're now approaching sort of gloomier weather, we're approaching the shorter daylight hours. What else do you think that companies could be doing around additional support to help their employees in these times?
Yeah, I think you picked up on a few of the suggestions earlier on. So I think access to employee assistance programs and kind of counselling if people need it if they're in a really difficult place. But I think probably the most important thing is just making this a topic people are talking about. So around mental health, around people's well-being, and just how they're doing on the work front. So I think a lot of things we take for granted when we're in the office. So non-verbal cues, picking up on people's mood when we're walking around an office, obviously we don't get. And I think, again, when you look at some of the studies around video calling and so on, people put on a persona often when they join a call, and you can position it in the way that you want. So I think we just have to be, and it's very un-British, but a bit more comfortable being direct in terms of asking people and checking in with people. And I think we also need to be a little bit sensitive around not overdoing it on the forced interaction. So for there's a large proportion of people who are less comfortable with social interactions. And actually, when you look at some of the research data that's been going on the last few months, for some people who are more introverted and less comfortable in social situations, they found the remote working a really positive experience. They can control the interactions far more than at work. So I think we just need to be mindful that we don't try and push people into lots of forced social situations that they feel less comfortable with. So I think we've got that balance there. But just, I think, more directive and just encouraging everybody to kind of just be mindful of how everyone else is and just be a little bit more active on that front than we would normally be.
Yeah, definitely. And Rob, for yourself on the employment law side, obviously lots of organisations are thinking about flexible working. They're thinking about how they can allow people to have that freedom of choice to do some home working and some office working based on business needs. I called out some of the considerations, but what are the kind of pitfalls that organisations need to be cognizant of as they're looking to maybe consult with employees longer term and maybe change contracts and introduce policies?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, quite a few have touched on it already, this kind of concept of the kind of ongoing dialogue with individuals as to what works for them as an individual in terms of their working pattern and things going forward. So that, whether you call it informal consultation or just general dialogue, is going to be so important on an individual basis. We've spoken about the kind of physical aspects of home working environments and the IT kit and all those things that have to be there to try and accommodate home working. And the kind of the mental health and well-being side as well. So dialogue just forms such an important part of that employer-employee relationship. I think the most important thing at the moment is, and most organisations have got it right, is to kind of say we are in a kind of temporary state still at the moment, and therefore it's an ever-changing landscape. We are reacting to a pandemic crisis and government guidance, and therefore to keep that message that we will keep reviewing this situation, and this is not a permanent state of affairs. So from a contractual perspective, it is really kind of, from a contractual perspective, business as usual, but we will review, and if contractual change is needed in relation to place of work or hours, we will look to deal with that in due course. I think there is still a piece around surrounding policies, remote working policies. There's no reason to stop organisations, looking at those again or introducing them to make sure policies are in place. And in terms of data privacy and confidentiality, again, that can fall to policy to work on that with employees now to get those in place. So there is, work to be done in terms of supporting employees, especially through policy considerations, and perhaps contract change actually will follow in due course. And the starting point for that will be that informal consultation you spoke about earlier.
Yeah, perfect. So we've had a question that was submitted in advance, and we'll obviously open for other questions from on the floor. So there's a little bit of context around this from the initial question sent. So having worked in and around the workplace discipline for almost 15 years, I've studied the occupancy levels of offices, ways of working, workplace strategies, and how the cognitive, physical and digital spaces all come together for the understanding and benefit of clients. With average office utilisation pre-COVID-19 sitting at around 40 to 50%, it's evident that physical space has become a growing wastage in line with the rise of better connectivity and technologies. This is supported somewhat with CRISP's survey on page 4, the pre-COVID-19 practices that highlight around 60% of businesses operate working from home 1 to 5 days a week. The reasons for low utilisation are numerous, but when space is utilised, it's often not being used for its desired function, i.e. meeting rooms as private rooms for phone calls and person desks as collaboration space. Unfortunately, COVID has made way for sensationalism that's led to binary debate about office versus home, office is dead versus office is live. binary arguments filtered through the marketing machine of those who seek most financial gain form a situation, not really understanding nuances of individual organisations and their needs. So it is Schrodinger's office. So the question is, therefore, how do we need to ensure choice, purpose and trust are instilled in the conversation about the future of workplace, and that the discussions are treated with individuality and objectivity that truly benefit organisations? And I think first, if we ask that of Matt, maybe for you to take first stab at that.
Yeah, I love that. So less of a question, more of a commentary, and I agree. And I think the note around actually for a lot of workplaces, that mix we had already in terms of the lower occupancy through the week, we were very rarely at 90 or 100%. And I would agree that a lot of the debate is unnecessarily binary. I think there's very few firms that I've spoken to who are seriously saying that we'll move completely back to 100% office-based working and presenteeism. But similarly, I haven't yet met anybody who said that they would, not that they wouldn't want to, but that they would feel able now to take away the option of position to be in. So I think we're going to be working towards that horrible term of hybrid working. But for me, I think the position we're in now is just questioning again, why do we have an office? I think Tom touched on this earlier. What's the purpose? And the purpose isn't anymore to give a place where people can access a computer or specialist technologies. For most people, there's still some roles where we need that. So it is very much the social function. And I think we can think again more creatively, well, what spaces allow for that? And I think it's a really exciting time if we go into it with that kind of mindset of what are we trying to use these spaces for? And that will be diverse, and it will differ company to company and maybe department to department as well. But I think there's an opportunity for all sorts of creativity around this.
Yeah, definitely. And to your point earlier with consultation with employees, and I think, Tom, have you got anything to add to Matt's?
Yeah, I certainly agree. The future has to be based on trust. So, you know, you know, and I'm an unashamed advocate of the office and a great champion of it. But it's not. But that's not because I believe in presenteeism, and I can perfectly understand and support flexible working and working from home for lots of good reasons, and people are different. You know, the view of an introvert or is different to the view of an extrovert. So, you know, we need a system that kind of strikes the right balance about what's right for the organisation, what's right for different people, but one that's also based on trust. I think, you know, in terms of the occupancy levels, I mean, we've studied occupancy levels, and I think there is a risk that the debate, I remember, I think someone from KPMG, Guy Stallard from KPMG, said companies can reduce the amount of office space by 50%. What a great boost to the chief financial officer. And I thought, well, yeah, until the chief financial officer realizes that their staff are less innovative, less creative, enjoying themselves less, interacting less. And so I think often we see the office as a cost, but don't really think about the benefits. And actually, for a lot of professional services firms, it's a relatively small cost overall. I do think the open plan office, as traditionally defined as like lots of desks and then a few meeting rooms, needs to be rethought. I think it's neither fish nor fowl. It's not great for collaboration because you get people huddling around desks and disturbing other people. And it's not that great if you really need to get your head down and concentrate. And we're thinking about the future of our offices and actually having greater variety of space. So there might be space, and it's there for collaboration. It's flexible. It's for interaction. It's the coffee machine and water cooler moment designed in. And then we're looking at other spaces, which is actually, this is more a quiet space. It's like a library, you know, it's a place you go to do your deep concentration. and work. So I think thinking about the different ways people will use space, and if they do come in, it might be specifically to collaborate, is interesting. There's also the problem of the TWAT problem, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. Which is when we find we have maximum demand for our space. And so, do you try and spread the demand out for the week, or do you just accept Mondays and Fridays are going to be a bit quieter, and your utilization isn't going to be as good? So I think it's an opportunity actually for us to make the office better. But that's got to be based on trust, and it's got to be based on a balance of needs of the organization as a whole and different employees.
Yeah, definitely.
Can I come in, Kirsten?
Yeah.
So just a couple of things. So I think I am just going to say that for some people, there is definitely still a requirement for an office where they can come and put their laptop and just work. We must remember that there are businesses where people are office-based and they're on lower incomes, or they're young and they're living in shared, accommodation. And so we mustn't forget that aspect of it. I noticed Stuart's comment on the chat about why has this become so kind of binary as an argument. I think to reflect on what both Matt and Tom said, I think there is a need for us to just sort of collectively reimagine, what do we want the office to be of the future, and what's been great about the things we've experimented with both during this time but prior to this time. I mean, I would say we need to look at what a lot of digital businesses are doing, actually, Kirsten. I mean, I've been in a lot of the offices of some of the digital businesses in Leeds, and I also worked at NHS Digital prior to joining the council. And NHS Digital did a lot of really interesting work experimenting with office space before moving into Wellington Place. So like creating that sort of cafe environment and collaboration space, which made a massive impact on culture in terms of people not having to book meeting rooms for meetings where they've got just 2 or 3 or 4 people coming together. And it really does transform the culture and the way that people operate. So I think the more we can sort of maybe see what different businesses are doing and share some of that, the better. And I do think the digital businesses in Leeds are probably more advanced than some of the other businesses in terms of the types of space they've got. I mean, I haven't had the pleasure of going into Crisp's offices as yet, hopefully maybe in the future. But I'm sure you do have those types of spaces in your working environment.
Yeah, and it's a great point you raise, Eve, that, we found that certainly within our employee population, we've got people who live in the city centre because, they're of their sort of age profile and they want to be close to the workplace and to their friends. But as a result, they're in shared accommodation. They don't have a separate workspace. And so they're working in their bedroom. And, and Matt, that can't be great for somebody psychologically, I'd imagine, to not have that separation.
No, and I think also, one of the biggest things, so predominantly when you look at research around how people respond to home working and different amounts of it, it's usually an overwhelmingly positive experience in terms of satisfaction and mental health and so on. Generally, if you've got a mix of other interactions as well. But the thing that people do struggle with is that boundary. And I think when you're in the smaller the house you're in or the more people you're sharing with, the harder it is to carve out a space that you can then leave the work in. And we know time and time again, when you look at how people have healthy work routines, it's around having something that starts and ends the day, have a space that is work, and where it bleeds into your social life, your personal life, it becomes very hard to detach. And looking at stress levels and so on, it's not a positive. And I'd agree with Eve around the diversity of employees as well, because I think we've got the potential to be breeding a bit of unrest, I think, maybe within companies as well. If you have some people who really need access to an office space and their individual needs aren't being met, so it's all social, or we're closing the offices down, that's generally tend to be the younger or kind of less well off in the company. But also I think in terms of just that career advancement, and it's those who are new to the company who are going to lose out most from opportunity. And I think all the kind of unhelpful sentiment we're getting around house prices and so on, boomers versus Gen Y and so on, I think you've got the potential for that when you come to this office argument as well, if we're not careful. Not everybody is in a large house where they have the luxury of a workspace and what have you.
No, exactly. And apologies to the attendees. Eve had to drop off. She has another event. Literally, we managed to catch her for 55 minutes in between Leeds Digital Festival events. But thank you to Eve for joining the panel. And you know, we've had another question, and then we'll sort of move to closing thoughts, unless there are any more burning questions. So the question from Stuart Clark is, I've been surprised by how heated some of the debate about working from home versus the office has been, and how do we make sure that we engage everyone? And I'll start with you, Tom.
Yeah, it has been heated, and it's become quite a binary debate. And I got a bit upset actually earlier in the week when I felt I'd been painted on Twitter. Someone had been painted a picture of as this sort of inflexible dinosaur who wants believes in presenteeism and an outmoded male-dominated sort of work culture, and it has sort of generated a sort of series of kind of emotions. So you know, I think ultimately, you know, people are different. Different organizations, different people have different needs. We need to think about collective needs of the economy and of our cities overall, as well as just our individual needs. None of us know what the answers are. This is an unprecedented situation. You know, structural change, which would normally take years, has been sort of compressed into a matter of days. You know, we transitioned to 14,000 people globally working from home using Teams virtually overnight, whereas previously it would have had this sort of 12-month change plan and all that sort of thing. And we don't know where it's going to lead us. So I think we should be open-minded and tolerant in the debate. But I think we do need to think through the implications of our personal preferences collectively for our cities, for key sectors of the economy, and also some of the longer term implications. Someone wrote slightly provocatively last week, if you think your job can be done at home, it could possibly be automated, and it certainly could be offshored. That might be a bit harsh, but there is potentially something in that. So I think we need to take a long-term perspective, be tolerant, recognize people and organizations are different, but think through what it means for us collectively, not just as individuals.
No, definitely. And interestingly, oh, here we are, the results of the poll. So we've got 65% of people who've not yet returned to working in the office, or their business hasn't yet. So I think that probably just speaks to the results that we saw with the survey that we did and the results we shared. So closing thoughts then. Let's start with Rob. Rob, obviously picking up on the importance of the conversation involving employees. Anything to add? Any closing thoughts and how you're feeling about sort of the future of the workplace?
No, I mean, I like the conversation earlier just on the point of trust, and it's just a reminder, you know, in the employment relationship we have this implied duty of trust and confidence, and that's going to play out, I think, in a lot of the conversations and developments about this kind of individual situation, how the individual wants to look at their working arrangements going forwards, whether it's a trial period basis or other. It's a timely reminder really in terms of that trust and confidence between employer and employee.
Perfect. And then Matt, yourself?
Yeah, I'd agree. I'd echo that. So I think trust, engagement and respect, I think, are key to this in terms of working out what space. I think physical space is only one thing, but the other work practices, how do we engage, interact, get the work done effectively and efficiently and creatively, but also in a way that's fun and enjoyable and motivating and retain staff. And I think the question around, or the point that we want to get back to offices because we can have presenteeism and keep an eye on everybody, you can do that kind of electronically as well. And there's all sorts of tools that firms can and do use. I think it's a bit of a false argument to be having. I think if you've got a culture of respect where people want to work, who cares? As long as the outcomes are what you're after, if people can get it done in 5 hours and they can go off for a swim in the afternoon, then great, I'm all for that.
Yeah, definitely focus more on the outcomes and outputs rather than the hours, and working smarter, not harder. And Tom, yourself, just before we close.
Yeah, I just echo the point that we want work to be enjoyable. Most of us work and make our employment choices about where we work. It's not just about pay and rations and doing tasks. It's about relationships. It's about enjoyment. It's about working with great people, clients, collaborators, and you know whatever the future model is, and it will probably be a hybrid between working from home and working from offices. We want it to be enjoyable, and we want people to take pleasure from that. So I think it's important we don't lose sight of that as well.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I appreciate everybody jumping onto this call, and thank you to our fantastic panel, and to everybody who's joined us, and stay safe and stay sane. And thank you very much for joining the debate. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thanks.
Bye bye.